The central prayer that we Jews say from the time that we're younger, from the time we begin to be able to speak, to our last moment in life is Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, that the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. What does it mean that the Lord is one? That there's only one God, there isn't somebody else? So we, Hasidim, say, God is one. Everything you see is included in God's being. There is nothing outside of God's being. That everything at the core is oneness. That there's nothing really outside of God. And that lies at the core of the discoveries of science of the 20th century and beyond. E equals mc squared indicates that energy and matter really are one and the same, which is an expression of unity, that there exists a unity within this universe. And this idea that there exists a unity within this universe that Einstein articulated actually is an old Jewish idea. That there's nothing outside of God, that everything is really one, that for each side, everything that's found in the universe really are related to each other and one with each other because they're one with God. There's an interesting thing that's happened just recently, and that is that science has declared Einstein right and Heisenberg wrong. That evidence indicates that the uncertainty principle may not be right, and that Einstein, who said that he doesn't believe that God plays dice, was correct after all. Now this underscores a point that I've been making in my videos. Science asserts certain things, and these are very, very good guesses as to what is going on. But it's not the ultimate truth, for the ultimate truth can change in one instance. In one instance, we believe in Heisenberg. We believe that things are indeterminate. You can't determine certain things for sure, that certain things are impossible to be known completely, and everything is just a probability. Along comes a different experiment and determines that Einstein was right after all. There's an argument in the world of physics. Who's right? Is Einstein right with his relativity? Are the other physicists right because of their quantum mechanics? And I don't know the answer to that. But one thing is for certain, that in one instant, the entire scientific community can be turned on its ear, and things that were thought to be true all of a sudden are not true. They just discovered that Einstein's constant is helpful in understanding what's going on in the universe, understanding the whole concept of dark matter, that there's a constant that Einstein has expressed, which this constant helps explain to them why the universe isn't expanding at a greater rate, and that's what holds everything together. And so, what we need to take from this is that just because you learn science doesn't mean that science is the absolute 100% truth on everything. For example, we've been talking about circumcision, and I've argued to you that circumcision is given by God, and because it's given by God, it has to be right. You say, no, there's evidence to so I say, well, the evidence that indicates that it's harmful, there's just as much evidence, and even more, that it's beneficial. And this gives us an argument back and forth that really doesn't lead to any conclusion. Because you all say that all the studies that I cite that are found in Wikipedia, you can find in your own computer, as I found them, all these studies are wrong. They're a bunch of garbage. Everything is wrong. All of the studies are flawed. All the studies are flawed except for the studies that back up the anti-circs. Let me just put this into you in perspective. Heisenberg's position that you can't know things for certain, it's all probability, is the basis of quantum mechanics. And the basis of quantum mechanics is the physics of the last half of the 20th century. And they criticize Einstein for failing to have understood and appreciated this. And now, all of a sudden, it's going back the other way. In other words, what science decided 50, 60 years ago is now being questioned and may turn out to be different and goes back to 75 years ago, where Einstein said it, or 80 years ago, that Einstein said he doesn't believe that God, that the Creator, rolls dice. And so, what else? What does that say about other things in the universe, other things in science? That things that appear to be in a certain way aren't necessarily so. Remember, the world had to come from somewhere. That's the conclusion that you have to come to, no matter what you do, no matter how you say this universe came about. You always come to the conclusion that there had to have been an intelligent beginner. That's God. If God created the universe, you have two choices. Either God told us what to do or didn't tell us what to do, left everything to our devices. That cannot be. The reason why that cannot be is because if he left people to their devices, people invariably are too weak to follow the path of truth. And the proof is Nazi Germany. Germany was the most developed and cultured of all the nations, prided itself in its humanitarianism. You couldn't hold a chicken upside down in the Weimar Republic without getting fined, because that was considered inhumane. 5 years later, 6 years later, they were killing people in the streets, murdering all of the people that were sick, destroying all of the homosexuals, destroying all the kids with emotional and intellectual problems, all the people confused, all the people in the crazy houses. They were all murdered. Then they took out and killed out all kinds of political prisoners. Then they killed out the Jews and murdered them en masse in a scientifically methodical method. Nazi Germany, the pinnacle of intelligence, of an intelligent society, of a humane society, created the worst killing machine that the world has ever seen. And that should tell you that God did not leave this world without some control, without some direction. And therefore, it is the Torah. It's the only document that has withstood the test of time. And that Torah tells us what we have to do. One of the principles of the Torah is that Jewish children should be circumcised at 8 days old. And remember, I want you to understand something. The Arabs circumcise at 13. At 13 is painful, and it evokes anger and frustration. And that leads to all different kinds of things. The reason why we're seeing all these suicide things and everything else, I can trace back to the 13-year-old deciding to injure himself, to hurt himself. And when you injure yourself, you want to get back at someone. You get back at society. You get back at other people who you hate. The Jewish child who is circumcised at 8 days old, this is at the core of his beginning, of his psyche, that he must give something up for himself, for his God, for his people, for his world. And that isn't out of anger and frustration, but a sense of understanding that the human being is only part of a world, because the world is unified. Hashem Echad, God is one. That means we are all one with God.